Welcome into Food and Conversations, a podcast of RAFI's Come to the Table program. I am David Allen alongside Justine Post. Justine, welcome to the pilot episode of Food and Conversations.
Yeah, thanks.
We have been trying to get a podcast off of the ground we've been kicking it around for a while, but we finally have come up with a great plan to bring you all some good content. We know that everybody is big podcast people these days, and Food and Conversations is going to be the next communications output from the Come to the Table team, where we are going to be bringing you great conversations from people all across the food system. So can't wait to dive into the goals and kind of some of the objectives that we have here for our podcast. If you're joining us, you might be familiar with RAFI and our organization or our program Come to the Table. But before we dive into our first guest today, and before we really get going for this podcast, I want to let Justine kind of give a high-level overview of RAFI and Come to the Table.
Thanks, David. RAFI, we are a farmer-serving organization primarily, and we have a lot of ways that we strive to reach and support small and mid-sized farmers. Come to the Table is a program of RAFI, and we try to bring faith communities and nonprofits and hunger relief organizations into the work of bringing about a more just food system that works for everyone. And that looks a lot of different ways. We have a biennial conference. Most folks know us by that. We just had one in March of 2026 in Winston-Salem that brings in close to 400 folks. But we also have other events and workshops, trainings that we bring to faith communities and nonprofits across the state of North Carolina. And we now have a stronger communications output. We're working on podcasts, different forms of storytelling, blogs. You can find us on Instagram with the whole goal of trying to support folks who are addressing food insecurity or folks who are working to bring about a more just food system. We want to provide you all with tools, with resources, with knowledge, opportunities to engage and strengthen your work.
Yeah.
So in light of that, I wanted David to talk a little bit more about why we're doing this, why we're doing the podcast.
Well, like you just mentioned, so we have TA, we have events and trainings, right? But a key part of what Come to the Table has always done and wants to continue to do and kind of evolve our communications is providing these tools and resources and knowledge for our constituents. And we have been doing blogs for a long time. Blogs were a big thing, in the last decade, and slowly their podcast has kind of taken over as one of the main ways that folks like to receive information. And so Justine and I and our team, we get to have great conversations with speakers from around the state and around the country all the time, either at conferences and events or in one-on-one webinars or whatever it might be. And so the goal of this podcast is just for us to bring some interesting folks from around the country, from around the state, who have work that intersects with Come to the Table's mission around food system, food justice, whatever it might be. Bring them in, have about a 30-minute conversation with them, and hopefully, leave with some practical takeaways for you, the listener. Sometimes we're going to have, farmer-focused people. Sometimes we might have food security focused people. We might do policy sometimes. You never know. We're trying to feel it out. We'd love to hear from you on what kind of guests that you would like to see on this podcast. So I think that sums up the goals for me. Justine, how does that sound to you?
Sounds perfect. Exactly.
Okay. All right. Well, this is the pilot episode. Okay, y'all. So give us a little grace. We're working things out. We're working the kinks out. We're going to try to have a little fun as we go through this. We're going to try to have some serious conversations. We're going to try to find that right balance between the two. So hang with us as we drop the first few of these. But I got to say, I'm excited for our first guest today. Chelsea Marshall is joining the pod. Chelsea is a longtime friend of Justine and mine, who we met a few years back working for the National Right to Food Community of Practice. So Chelsea is the Director of Special Projects for the National Right to Food Community of Practice. She has a master's in human rights law and a PhD in law from Queen's University in Belfast. She worked for several years in Scotland, advancing the right to food and promoting dignity in response to food insecurity. And Chelsea now lives in New England and is a consistent source for us of great resources, helpful conversations, and generative ideas for the right to food. It's an honor to welcome Chelsea to the first episode of Food and Conversations.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to see you both and to be here.
Well, I just read a bio of yours. I did not ask you for the bio beforehand. I made it up myself, but there was a lot of good stuff in there. I just want to say that Justine and I both became connected with you through the National Right to Food Community Practice. We were together at an event in Syracuse. We were part of a narrative change subcommittee, and that's where our connection formed, and we have been working together ever since. But when I was reading your bio, Chelsea, I read you have a PhD in law from Queen's University in Belfast, and I have never once called you Dr. Marshall. So I'm wondering, for the rest of the podcast, is that what you would prefer? Do I need to call you Dr. Marshall from here on out?
Absolutely not. Some of my friends that I was living with when I did my PhD like to call me Dr. Marshall as a bit of a joke or a jibe, but no, you do not have to call me Dr. Marshall. Chelsea is
Okay.
Also learning that you did your PhD in Belfast. I have two things to share about Belfast. I know the Titanic Museum is there, but I've never been. Also, one of the best Cubans of my life I had in Belfast.
That is a really good Cuban. That is, yes,
And I
correct.
don't even need to name the restaurant because I imagine there's like just one Cuban
I think
restaurant and
there's
it's
just
on that
one. I think it might be called Cubano.
Yeah.
Yeah, that they were like one of the best places at the little market. There was like a Saturday market,
Uh-huh.
and they used to come there first, and then they started their restaurant. And my husband worked at the Titanic exhibition when it opened. He was one of the first like tour guides there. So there was a period of time where I knew far too many details about the history of shipbuilding and the Titanic and everything in Belfast. So
Uh-oh. Well, good thing this podcast isn't called Food and Shipwrecks because
yeah, it
I
is.
might start needing to interview your husband and many other people. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
We can
fascinating.
Pardon the
have a follow-up
metaphor here.
conversation about that. Yes.
Pardon the metaphor. We're navigating waters here of Justine not completely sidetracking this conversation into conversations around the Edmund Fitzgerald and the Titanic. So we've talked Cuban sandwiches, we talked Titanic, just how I thought this would start.
Right.
But Chelsea, when I read through your bio, I mentioned a lot of things like human rights law, your work in Scotland. I did not mention that you had some work in children's rights as well. But I'm wondering if you could just start us off by telling us a little bit about how, if at all, some of the previous work that you did led to your current position with the Right to Food Community of Practice, and kind of how you what you do now with your work for the Community of Practice.
Sure, of course. So there have been multiple chapters, as you noticed when you were looking through. It sort of started off, my work and research and interest in all of this started off with really questions about how we design democracies to be as participative and inclusive as possible. So I started focusing on that because I spent a semester in South Africa, and then I had the distinct honor and privilege of living in Greensboro during the Greensboro Truth and Reconciliation Commission process. And I was the public hearings coordinator for that process at the start of it, and was really learning about how societies that are coming out of conflict or dealing with deep histories of conflict can use reconciliation processes to kind of design a different way of being together in community. And then Northern Ireland, of course, had a long-standing conflict, 35 years. I decided to do my master's and then PhD in Northern Ireland to be able to explore human rights law within the context of a society that was asking these questions. What does it take for us to live in and create and co-create a space where more people feel that their voices are included? I'm not going to say Northern Ireland had everything right. They definitely didn't. You can read my PhD about that if you want, from the perspective of young women and girls who were growing up in more marginalized parts of what was still the very divided sections of North and West Belfast. But the questions they were asking were very intentional about what kind of society we want to be building. What does that look like? Who needs to be involved? What does decision making look like? And around that same sort of time, I was kind of in parallel doing this work on children's rights and how we involve people who are typically, I mean, they are excluded from kind of electoral processes for being represented in, kind of government in that way. But a lot of really interesting, great work is happening in how we engage those marginalized voices in decision making. And a lot of it sort of fit into other conversations that I was having with the Participation and Practice of Rights project, where we were working with groups of community members who had issues around housing or issues around mental health services, issues around the safety in their communities for their children to play. And again, what does it take for people to start to see themselves as rights holders instead of just stakeholders, or people who are kind of one of many people who might possibly maybe be involved in a decision, to actually, this is about us and we really deserve to be involved in designing and delivering these services, or designing what's happening here. So really gained a lot of my understanding of the power and strength of a human rights framework for bringing people's voices into those spaces through that work in the Participation and Practice of Rights project. And then my husband and I moved over to Scotland. Had to restart my career a little bit, but Scotland was just beginning to really get engaged around how the right to food and food insecurity looked in our context. So I started working for Nourish Scotland right around just at the start of what was called the Dignity Project, and led that for a few years, and did other work around cash first responses to food insecurity, which we can come back to if that's interesting or useful. But sort of looking at different ways we can design and deliver services at a local and regional level in particular to address food insecurity from a more dignified perspective. And then we came to the US, and thankfully I was really pleased to be able to meet up with Allison Cohen and other folks who were involved in the community of practice at a time when they were still kind of figuring out who we were going to be. I've been around for a couple of years now, and I'm now the director of special projects, as you know, and I've had the opportunity to work with you all and other members across the US, and it's a dream. So it was a winding path, I think, but it all sort of makes sense if you look back along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Well, you mentioned towards the end of your path starting to work with Nourish Scotland and the right to food. So I'd love to kind of get into that with you. I think it's something that a lot of people hear about and might even agree with in a vacuum, that everyone has a right to food, but don't fully understand all of the complexities within that. So if someone stopped you on the street and asked you about your work, how would you sum up what you're advocating for?
This is a really great question. And as David knows from our work in the narrative group, it depends on who you're talking to. So I'm interested to know who this person is. I would want to know who this person was. What are they doing? What are they interested in? Who are they within this system? But because for some people, human rights are tools for helping us in the fight that we're already in to transform the food system into one that nourishes people and the planet. They are they're tools that we can draw on from international principles and kind of recognized value statements across the world to be able to strengthen and cohere and help the work that we're trying to do towards a more unified perspective, where dignity is at the heart of it, and these kind of dual aims of nourishing people and the planet are at the heart. That probably wouldn't be the thing I would say to someone like a neighbor who stopped me on the street. I might say that the work I do is about helping us get closer to a world where everybody can reliably access food that meets their needs with dignity and choice, both now and in the future. And so if that was the end of the conversation, that would be enough for me, that they knew that was what the right to food meant from my perspective. But if they were nerdy and asked me any additional questions, which you might, if you want, then I could certainly tell you a lot more about what that looks like when you start to unpack all the different details to it.
Yeah, great
It
response.
is
Thank you.
it is kind of humbling though to have to like hand up on maybe the question, because it's like having someone walk up to you on the street and ask you what you do. It is actually like it's kind of refining to have to think about for a second, like if I could only distill this in a sentence. And I love that, choice and dignity were both a part of how you said that from now and in the future. That sounds like a statement from somebody who works in narrative change. You got the key words there. I love that. I was like, I need to use that. We need to write that down. So yeah, thanks
Well,
for sharing that.
it is incredibly hard to get it into one statement because there's so many different parts of it. Like, and this is one of the things, if somebody, if I was having a coffee with someone and we wanted to talk about it in a little bit more detail, there are four key dimensions of the right to food, and the reason why it matters that there are four of them is that they hold each other in this really productive tension. So it's not just about having enough food in the world, because we could go ahead and focus all of our energy on just producing a lot of nutritionally poor food. And it's not just making sure that that food is accessible to people, because we could get a lot of nutritionally poor food that people don't recognize as part of their culture, that isn't helping to sustain their well-being or the well-being of their community, and just make sure everybody has access to that. Or we could focus all of our energy on the sustainability of our food and forget that the cost of that made it out of reach for people who didn't have, the economic resources to be able to afford that. Or we could spend all of our time focused on what we're producing and building up a world for farmers and producers, but again forget kind of like where that's being located and who's involved in that. So these four principles: available, accessible, adequate, and sustainable, both now and in the future, kind of make sure that we don't ruin our soils in the process of trying to produce a bunch of cheap foods so that everybody can eat now. They hold each other in this productive tension.
Thank you. Yeah, I think uplifting that tension point is incredibly important in this. So let's say I am the neighbor that wanted to dig in more, and you just shared with me kind of four of those points. But also, can you tell us about any successful examples of the right to food in the United States or elsewhere, if it's not happening here?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different things about what success looks like, right? So, and this goes back a little bit to like whether it's a tool for moving us towards that world, or whether we're talking about like realizing, getting to an outcome. So there isn't anywhere on earth where everybody is reliably accessing the food that meets their nutritional needs with dignity and choice, both now and in the future. Like, we just don't have a food system that enables that, to a food or economic system that's enabling that to happen globally. But there are places where there have been real successes in terms of articulating what the goals are and putting that into law or policy, so that we're all better coordinated around moving towards that. So the most significant example in the United States is that Maine has amended our state constitution to protect the right to food. So we're the only state in the country that has a legal protection within our constitution, amongst the other rights that the constitution recognizes, around the right to food. So that was a really big, significant moment, and it's one of the reasons that the community of practice exists. We came about because other people across the country wanted to understand a little bit more about how that happened and if there was a possibility to do it there. In Morgantown, West Virginia, they've passed a city resolution. So it's not a sort of legal entitlement. You couldn't use it in a court, but it does state and sort of articulate an intention to be working towards that as a city. It's a resolution, sort of like a purpose. New Jersey has a statewide resolution on the right to food, and the New Jersey Food Democracy Collaborative is using that to really frame their policy initiatives and their policy agenda for the next year. So it's helping to really build that framework of analysis and practical asks across the state. And there's some really interesting work happening in Honolulu right now. Honolulu has an opportunity to update its city and county charter only once every 10 years. And there are some fabulous conversations happening about getting a right to food amendment to the city charter there, which would, again, kind of be a framework for taking steps in the future in the city and the county. I don't know whether that's going to pass. We're really in the middle of it at the moment, but it's been a really rich and fruitful opportunity for discussion, even if it doesn't pass this time. And there are other things that are going to come about as a result of that. And I just want to say before we move on that getting things into law and policy is not the only aim. Like, it's definitely not the end goal. It's really helpful because it helps to articulate the intention. It also frees up sometimes resources, but especially government officials' time to be able to do a thing, right? Like, if there's no obligation for the right to food to be part of the sort of policy priorities of a state or a county or a city, then it's really hard to work in collaboration with those city officials or those county officials because it's not in their remit. It's not part of the work that they're trying to do. So it can be really helpful in that way as a kind of structure for decision making, but it requires the active and ongoing participation of rights holders and communities in kind of like building it into practice, making it happen in real life, making sure that it doesn't just become something that's a law on the books or a policy on the books. It really needs to be like a living, breathing, activated tool in real life.
Yeah, Chelsea, I think that's what kind of unlocked the right to food stuff for me, is that when I went to Syracuse for the first time, if my dad would have asked me, what are you going to do around the right to food, I would have had a hard time articulating it, because I think, to me, I thought that it was all about it being legally enforceable at the state, federal, local level. That's where my head was, because that's how I think a lot of people think about rights in that way. And so we'll put this down in the show notes if show notes exist. I'm going to try to get show notes to exist in Spotify, right? Got to be a chance a part of making the right to food narrative framework with you and several others. And that process of looking at goals, obstacles, and solutions, and seeing that there are 15 to 20 goals and 12 of them have nothing to do with advancing the right to food in law and policy, right? And so that's one thing that I wanted just to add to, is that, like, as you said, success looks different. I think when we were working with churches, right, we have the ability to say, like, let's look at this framework and see one or two things on the goals list that you think you can tap into. We're not asking you that you've got to be trying to, legally get this enforced at your local level, although that would be great. There are ways that, for instance, when I'm looking at the goals right now, everyone having the means to secure, prepare, and consume nutritious and culturally valued food, you can be a part of that, right? So, like, I keep saying tap in. My brother always says tap in. You can tap into that, right? So that's one thing that's, I think, really powerful, and I've enjoyed being a part of. But on this sheet, this framework, are goals, obstacles, and solutions. And I think right now, personally, I feel that the obstacles, like, feel heavier than normal given the climate that we're in. And so I'm wondering if you could talk through what are some of the consistent pain points, struggles around the right to food, whether that is in law and policy or in practice. Like, I guess, what are the things that are coming up for you on a routine basis?
Yeah, so I think that what you were just describing is one of the big challenges, a misunderstanding about what the right to food is. I think it's like really not uncommon for people to believe that when you say right to food, it's like creating some sort of obligation for the state or the government to feed everybody. That's what we're talking about. And that is crazy and isn't the kind of world that people want to live in. And I can appreciate that. That's a sort of strange world that we probably don't want to live in. So a misunderstanding, or just like a lack of awareness about what the right to food is, it's absolutely not anybody's fault. We are living in a country that has not recognized or ratified the most economic, social, and cultural rights around the world, unlike most other countries in the world. So it's not It's not anybody's fault, but it's just not common language. So sometimes it can be helpful to just reframe that as food as a human right can be a little bit less complicated for people to get their heads around in the first instance, because it sounds a little bit less like you're going to get food from somebody that you just get to declare you have a right to it. Another key criticism from people who are a little bit closer to maybe working on a legislative proposal or a resolution or something, they might say, "Oh, it's too vague. It's too aspirational. There's no teeth to this. What does it really mean when you say this?" And that's also a real criticism, right? Like it can sound very maybe idealistic or something to be talking about this world where everybody can access the food that they need with choice and dignity, both now and in the future. But the point about human rights is that it gives us an operating framework and a direction to be working towards together. And it gives us a set of tools and a set of expectations around who should be involved in those choices. How transparent should those decisions be? How should budget be working? How equitable are the policies and practices that we're putting in place? So on one level, yes, it is a large aspiration. On another level, it's incredibly practical and technical about how we put these things into practice. And it's all the time in all the places. So we can get into some of the, perhaps some examples of where that actually plays out. But I would say while the world we might be looking for sounds aspirational, it's not vague at all. It's very concrete. It's about people being able to afford raspberries if that's what matters to them, and not having to walk past the fresh fruit aisle every single time. That because they can't afford to buy fresh fruit. It's about people having enough time in their working week to be able to sit with their families and enjoy a meal together. It's about being paid enough at your minimum wage job to be able to afford the food that you and your family need, or to be given enough resources from the state to make up the difference for that, and to know that you can rely on that, and that it's not a handout or that you are some sort of beneficiary, that it's actually just the society that we have created that enables all of these things to happen, that we're all working towards that society where that is happening. And then the final thing I will say is that I think there's a lack of confidence, and this goes to the kind of obstacles that we're facing right now, David. There's sometimes a lack of confidence that we can do anything differently than what we're doing right now, that anything will change, that anything can change, that it's too big, that the corporations run it all, that politicians are all corrupt, that nothing can ever change. And I get that, and sometimes I feel that too. And I just can't believe that to be true. We are at a very difficult time in our history right now, but I still believe everybody's got a stake in this world of working towards a society where everybody can afford the food that they need with dignity and choice. Not just now, but also in the future. If we're not working towards that, then what are we doing? What are we doing? So yes, it's going to be hard, but I think when we get together around a shared aim that people can really believe in and also comes from a shared value place, then we've just got to keep moving. We just got to keep looking for opportunities.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I'll pass it to Justine. I just wanted to say, like, I know personally, one thing I've said about the right to food and being a part of the community of practice is I think it can be really easy. It feels like, talking with folks, it feels like you're on the defensive a lot, protecting SNAP, protecting whatever federal benefit of the day it is that's being cut. And to me, to be able to posit a positive vision toward a right to food has been incredibly helpful. And so I just wanted to say I really appreciate that, and I'll kick it to Justine.
Yeah, I feel that. So for folks that are listening, how can they advocate for a right to food in their communities, and how can they help enact this if it's not just policy change, if it's also kind of how we act in food assistance spaces or wherever we are?
Thanks. Yeah. So the show notes, I'm sure, will include ways that you can sign up to become part of our community of practice. So you can become a member of the community of practice. You can also just join our newsletter, or you can join one of our working groups. So David's part of the shared narrative working group, but we also have a few others. And I suppose if what you're primarily interested in the first instance is how to sort of make some advances locally, I would point you towards the working group about right to food in local places. So there are advocates from different parts of the country that join together to talk about what's going on in their local places, how food policy councils are doing work to advance the right to food in this particular area, or, like the Honolulu group sharing what's happening in their city charter, for example. I would also encourage folks to look for and join any local food policy council. So, of course, some of them will be focused on policy, but a lot of them also have kind of other ways of getting involved in the community. And there's kind of more and more food policy councils across the country are starting to think about and take a right to food approach to the work that they're doing. And if they're not, you can bring it, which is good. And you can talk to us about how to do that. And then the last thing I might do is suggest that someone just think about the experience of food in your community, for you, for your neighbors, for people who maybe aren't your neighbors, don't live in your neighborhood. What's missing that's keeping those people from you or your neighbors or these other people from being able to live a life where the right to food is realized? What's making it so that some of these groups are not able to reliably access the food that meets their needs, or ensures that it's true both now and in the future? There are so many ways to get involved. It might on the face of it look like nothing to do with the right to food in the first instance. It could be getting together around resisting a data center coming in because that's going to have a knock-on effect on people's electricity bills, which is going to make it harder for people to afford their groceries. Like, that is still going to affect the realization of the right to food or the ability for people to reliably access the food they need, even if it has nothing to do with it on the face of it. So do what excites you and get involved in the places and spaces that you think are really interesting. But I would encourage and support you to start finding the ways that it makes these links, and buy from a local farmer if you can, and actually talk to them if you see them at the farmers market, and try and make a connection with them. But also, if you are working in a food access space, really prioritize the idea of promoting and enhancing the dignity of the people that are coming to that space. Find ways that they can be involved in designing and delivering that service so that it becomes less of a we give to you and more of a as a community we do. And that is going to help take us towards that place. So there are many, many different opportunities, and everybody's got a stake in it.
Thank you. Absolutely. And I think even just the goal of the right to food framework and opportunities is really opening up that food access and food insecurity doesn't exist in a vacuum, that there's so many other links and points to how people understand food insecurity. So lastly, you've mentioned and touched a lot on dignity and choice within this framework. Could you talk about why you focus on dignity and choice in food assistance spaces in particular?
Yeah, so dignity is really the core value, maybe, of the human rights, of human rights. I suppose dignity and accountability and transparency and participation and all of these things sit alongside each other. But if we were designing our societies to promote and enhance the dignity of every person that lived there, we'd be doing pretty well for ourselves if that was the organizing principle that we used. And in absence of being able to design our societies that way, what are the spaces that we do have some control over? I think shifting the focus from feeding as many people as possible to promoting and enhancing dignity for people who are already experiencing threats and risks to their dignity because they are not able to reliably afford the food that they need is really critical. And it just makes it gives you a really useful and important lens to test some of your assumptions about what's happening in the way that you've designed your program. Like maybe you're open from 2 to 4 in the afternoon because your volunteers who are retired are available to work from 2 to 4 in the afternoon. But if that means that people can't come to your service or have to, really risk getting across town to be able to do that during that time, then we haven't organized the service around promoting the dignity of people that are coming to that. Or if you're only open for a short amount of time because your church basement only allows you to come in for a short amount of time, and that means people have to stand outside in public or in the rain waiting to get into your service because you haven't created enough time for people to come, then again, what sort of slightly different decisions could we be taking, even though all these decisions they're all compromises and all difficult. But if the aim was not to feed as many people as possible, but the aim was to restore the dignity of people that were coming to us, then what does that look like? And I think we can kind of expand that question out to all the decisions that we're taking all the time around all the decisions that our local, state, federal governments are taking. We have to make hard decisions. It is really difficult to make all the decisions that we need to make at the moment. But if organizing our lives or organizing those decisions towards an emphasis on dignity would really help us make better ones, I think.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you so much, Chelsea, for sharing all that. We're going to try to end on a little bit of a lighter note, I think, going forward on all of our episodes to kind of transition us out of some of the more serious stuff. So, hey, this is a food podcast. So we want to know what's something that you've eaten recently that was delightful. And then also, what have you read recently? We have a bunch of folks who are always looking for good resources, whether it's something that's related to food or if it's completely different. If you're into some fiction or poetry or what have you, or Justine just finished a book about the wreck of Edmund Fitzgerald, we'll take it. We're willing to hear anything. So what have you eaten good and what have you read good recently?
So I am from Maine, and so I can't not talk about oysters. I don't eat oysters all the time, but when you asked this question, I was like, probably the last oyster that I had was one of my favorite things. The last bite of food that was really particularly enjoyable. So, and there's oysters taste different in the summer and in the winter. So it's just always fun and interesting and different and new. Also a really good sustainable thing to eat. Very good climate choice to be making. You can be eating low on the food chain, and oysters are very good for our seas and food systems. It's very hard to figure out what to share about one good thing that I've read recently because I don't want to share there's some really exciting, interesting reports, but that seems a little bit too nerdy. So in any case, I'm going to suggest instead, this is not that it's not a light read, but it is a really fantastic read. So Arundhati Roy is an Indian author and political writer, and her memoir came out recently. It's called Mother Mary Comes to Me, and it is phenomenal. It is not, as I say, not a light read, but a really interesting one. And if you've ever read anything that Arundhati has written over the years, this will give you a context for her life and her childhood and, just all of the kind of bravery that it takes to be the person that she is in the world. And it made me go back and read The God of Small Things again and to see all the connections and linkages that book had to her actual original childhood. So really highly recommend, although not at all food related.
No, that's great. Yeah, I read The God of Small Things in divinity school. So when you said the name, that popped for me. So that's really cool. Well, I don't know what to say about the show notes and how this is actually going to unfold, but I love the idea that now we're dropping links to memoirs. We talked pilot TV episodes. I guess maybe if you have an oyster recipe that you want me to, well, oysters don't really need recipes, I guess, but if you need, I don't know, I'll link that as well. So, Chelsea, thank you for hopping on the maiden voyage of the Food and Conversations podcast. We really appreciate it, your time, and thank you so much for what you've done for the community of practice and also your partnership with Come to the Table and RAFI. So thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I am very glad that it wasn't the maiden voyage of the Titanic.
That's right. That's a good way to end it. We'll stop there. All right. Big thanks to Chelsea Marshall, our first podcast guest here on Food and Conversations. We nailed the conversation aspect, and at the very end, we got to talking about food. We talked a little oysters. Justine, it's almost dinner time. What you always have something special? I feel like cooking for dinner. What's on tap for tonight?
Tonight on tap, we've got buttermilk chicken. You soak any kind of chicken full, or we've got some thighs. We're big chicken thigh people. We got that going in some buttermilk, and it's been sitting in the fridge all day. And we're gonna, hopefully, if the rain holds off, we will grill it. If not, just a little cast iron, salt and pepper, some sides. That's how we do it. What about you?
Oh my! I'm coming to your house now. Is what I'm doing. I'm coming over for dinner. That sounds lovely. No dinner plans yet for tonight. But I will say, last night on the Blackstone, burgers, veggie dogs, and I'll tell you this: a little blueberry corn salsa action out of the young David Ray Allen. Put a little and some microgreens as well, grown locally here in Durham.
Okay.
All I'm saying, maybe this is going to turn into a conversation podcast, obviously, but also maybe we might have to throw recipes in at the end. We'll have to see. We'll have to attach that to a recipe. Get a photo of Chelsea eating an oyster, you with your fried chicken, and then me with a little blueberry corn salsa. So.
Okay, I feel like for our listeners, people need to know that I've been talking about blueberry corn salsa for years. So this is a huge revelation for me right now.
I had blueberries, I had corn. I said, you know what? It's time. It's time for me to make my first endeavor into this. So
what'd you think?
Delightful. Yeah. I mean, I ate some earlier today out of what that was left over, just straight out of the container. So
that's how
it's
you
hard
do
to beat that.
Yep.
Thank you all for listening to the first episode of Food and Conversations. We're going to be releasing these monthly, is the goal. And we ask you to do all the fun things: rate, review, subscribe, share it with your friends, let them know that this podcast has been released. We really appreciate your support and sharing this out. Let us know on our Instagram. Let us know via email, whatever you have to get out to reach one of us, who you'd like to have on the podcast, and any ideas that you have for us going forward. So for Justine, I'm David Allen, and thank you for joining us on the first episode of the Come to the Table podcast, Food and Conversations.